Okay, I think we are on. So let's start. Good morning, the people on this side of the ocean, and a very, very good morning to Steve, who's I think you're the earliest here, 7 o'clock, Paul. And the Adventist in you doesn't take coffee like the Adventist in me, sorry. But welcome and good evening, the people back home. Karibu, today our topic is on spiritual bypassing. And as we did last week when we did narcissism, we are also laying a disclaimer. Once you learn this, it's not that you're going to go around and tell people you're spiritually bypassing. You put it in your mind and go on. So, tufungulie kituo.
Okay, welcome. My name is Saya. I help people going through transitions. What simply means is I help you develop new maps to navigate your new world with confidence and clarity. For those who are not familiar with the Christian scriptures, or called the Bible, it's a volume of 66 books divided into two sections. One of 39 books is called the Old Testament, and the second portion of 27 books is called the New Testament. In the category we call the New Testament, the dominant figure outside of Jesus Christ is Paul, an individual who initially was called Saul of Tarsus, and on his conversion, he became called Paul. Paul writes at least 15 of the 27 books. So to even say he's dominant or critical in shaping Christian thought and behavior is a severe understatement, especially given the fact that of the remaining 12 books, 5 are accounts of the life of Jesus and the life of the disciples. So it just basically means outside of 15 doctrine books, the other non-doctrine of the remaining 12, only around 7 or thereabout are non-doctrinal books, so to speak, loosely. Paul, in one of his powerful metaphors, describing or engaging the Christian, talks about the armor of God. And in an attempt to inspire the Christians, then he picked from the metaphors of his time, and he looked at the best organized army and the best kitted army of his time, which turned out to be the Roman Empire, the Roman legionary. And he immortalizes those words by saying, put on the full armor of God. And he creates a parallel between the articles in the soldier's uniform and the parallels within the Christian experience. And so for the helmet, he says it's going to be a helmet of salvation. For the breastplate, he says it's going to be a breastplate of righteousness. For the belt, or in the old language, you call it the girdle, he says it's going to be the belt of truth. And then he says the feet will be shod with the preparation to preach the gospel. And then there's a shield of faith, and there's the sword of the word. What's interesting in Paul's depiction of what the Christian should be in his culture is by embracing the metaphor of a soldier, he shows that a Christian needs to be ready for two things, for both offense and defense. And therefore, he doesn't make the whole attire be only sword only, okay? Which would mean that all the Christian will be doing is going out on offense. Neither does he make the entire attire be only all shield, okay? Which would mean that the Christian will take the posture of only being a recipient, only on the defensive. And he then, in subsequent letters, in his 15 volume of works that he puts together, he begins showing or tracing lines how this looks practical. I'm tempted to believe a later writer, James, who is actually the brother of Jesus, is really borrowing from Paul's thinking, when he pens those very powerful words in the book of James that says, in a sense, what is needed for the Christian work is a blend of faith and works. And James makes a very powerful assertion. He says, faith without works is dead. And he says, the only way you can demonstrate faith is through the works. And he does not say it is either faith or works. He says, at the end of the day, for you to walk properly, or normally you need like 2 legs. And so one leg in the Christian walk is going to be faith, and the other leg is going to be works. And when the two are in harmony, you're not limping, but you're steady and able to go well. The Christian church, or the Christian, burgeoning Christian community, inspired by thoughts like this, the idea of Paul depicting Christianity as being a movement that was flexible enough to be both offensive and defensive. And offensive here doesn't mean obnoxious. It just means going out to do its mandate, and defensive meaning able to take in criticism and attack. Okay, and James being able to go forth and say things like faith without works is dead. Shaped by this thought, the Christian movement at that point became very revolutionary. It became the most multicultural movement ever seen on the earth. Some historians have said, even to date, there's been never more multi-ethnic, multi-class, more diverse movement ever created under the sun, like the Christian movement. It was able to, using this thinking of its early founders, be able to cut across lines of class, lines of race, lines of ethnicity, bringing together Jews and non-Jews in something even the political movement was not able to effectively do then. So it was the most multi-ethnic. And then it was, number 2, one of the most caring communities available at that time. Now, in the Roman time, there was a lot of infanticide, the killing of children. And this had a lot to do with the sex ethic of the time. The sex ethic of Roman time was that sex was an appetite, and it was satisfied by whichever means it was needed. Therefore, there were sex slaves. If you were higher in hierarchy or in power within the Roman system, you could basically have sex with anybody. And one of the results of this is, of course, pregnancies, and many of which are unwanted. And then the preference that was given to boys over girls meant a lot of girls were going to be, and the infanticide of that time was not abortion, but it was children would be born and then left to exposure and die. And what the Christians began actively doing is taking such children and bringing them to their home and raising them. And so, of course, within an amount of time, Christianity was growing. It was a place where children were well cared for. And if you're taking care of children, you're probably also doing a good job of taking care of women who are not very well regarded within that society. And so when you read even the Bible and history itself, you find Christianity as a movement has a high proportion of women holding prominence and being very important individuals in the movement. So again, because of what Paul and James and Peter and Jesus had taught, Christianity becomes a very multi-ethnic, and then it becomes a very pro-life, holistically pro-life, not just preventing abortion, but also taking care of the infants thereafter. And then the third thing that became very true about them was they were able to go into their various trades and crafts with the understanding that whatever they were doing to the glory of God. Paul himself is depicted as being a tent maker. And then there were people like Aquila and Priscilla who were depicted as being traders of purple. And of course, a lot of the bunch of initial disciples were initially fishermen. And Paul puts it in a beautiful statement when he says, whatever your hands find to do, do it with all your might. Now, as a result, Christians became individuals who, in their respective trades and crafts, did it very well because, and excelled very well because they were being admonished that, A, you're doing this not because you're being seen by your masters, but you're doing this because of the glory of the God you serve. The net result is Christianity blossomed and grew and blew up. But fast forward to 2023, and things seem to be very different. It seems we have stripped the entire metaphor of the armor of God and reduced it in some cases to just to be only one thing, all shield, And so all it seems that a lot of the popular religion, and you see a lot of this in many popular movements, and a lot of them on the African continent and in the majority world, seem not to be looking at the other practical aspects that made Christianity Christian. There's a lot of emphasis now on things like prayer and study of the word, which were not frowned upon and which were not looked upon, but in the original Christian thought, they were not the with all and end all. So the Christian did not read the Bible and pray in Paul's time and feel that his or her duty has ended with that. In fact, the more they read the Bible, the more they felt a duty to love their neighbors and serve them in practical ways. But we're now in an age and time where Christianity, for various reasons, some of them being very historical, has increasingly retreated from the public square. And there seems to be a version or a variant of Christianity which is more concerned with the individual private life than it is about impacting the society. But an even more dangerous version that we now see is this one where faith is seen as a magic wand, where there is no concern for the practical things. In James's words, faith without works. We see a Christianity now that is all faith and no works, that does not seem to have a regard for science or duty or honor or diligence. And the very needed spiritual acts are presented as the one in all panacea. So families that are having marital problems are simply told to pray and nothing more. Children who are having mental health challenges are only told to pray. Not that prayer is not important, but prayer should be the beginning and not the end. And then society challenges that exist are only treated to national days of prayer. But then beyond that, the Christian seems to have disengaged from the conversation thereafter, and more so the practical action that needs to happen that way. So at both a national and even at a personal or a family or a private level, there seems to be the use of Christianity. And I'm using Christianity here, but all I've explained can be true when you think about Hinduism or Islam or Buddhism or whichever other major faith tradition. We're having a situation where individuals are minimized their faith, A, to be very private, but then B, misused their faith or under-leveraged their faith so that all they do is the private, personal bits of faith, and they are not able, their faith is either used as a shield to protect them from engaging or facing or confronting some practical realities that they need to do. The end result is this: A, in some cases, Christianity ends up being seen as nothing more than a harmless delusion. That this thing is a delusion, but we can tolerate it because it is harmless. In some other cases, Kenyans within their mind have the horrors of Shakahola still very prominent. Some of these spiritual bypassing behaviors end up becoming really harmful, genuinely like so harmful, like the case of people fasting until they end up dying. That becomes a very harmful thing. Now, I'm not saying that Christians have stopped running orphanages and feeding the hungry and running food pantries and stuff. But what I'm saying is this increase of manifestation of faith like this becomes worrying. And with modern news, where when a dog bites a man, it's not news, but when a man bites a dog, that makes the news. It follows that when Christians hide within their faith or misleverage or underleverage their faith, that is what forms the front pages of everything. And it is shaping the way individuals engage with Christian faith or Islam faith or Hindu faith or Buddhist faith at the end of the day. Now, we need to have an important discussion with this for two important reasons. One is when you read historically what true Christianity was able to do, both in its times of formation and through the ages, it's a pity that such a brilliant gem should be lost. But then secondly, as we have seen in cases like the Jim Jones massacre, the Shakahola horrors, the Heaven Gate individuals who committed suicide, when people begin over-leveraging spirituality in what we will learn today is called spiritual bypassing, it can have harmful effects, sometimes even leading to death. And so we need to confront this. The question being, how then do we go back to the faith that James said, faith without works is dead? How then do we recapture the faith which Paul described as being a complete armor system that is able to both offend and defend? How is it that we can have a genuine discussion about spiritual bypassing and more so overcome it? Back to you in studio.
Asante sana. I was almost saying ready kilowatt. It ages me, right? Okay, let's start from here. Steve, because you're our ladies and gentlemen, today we have a real person in our midst. So Saya will just be over there faking it. Steve, as the first of all, you'll explain to us what a chaplain is, but I want you to explain to us what. Okay, I think there's something in your audio, you're echoing. As you tinker with that, could you tell us the difference between being religious and being spiritual?
Okay,
just speak, let me hear. Okay, you're mute now.
you hear me?
Okay, just let me hear the audio. Tutakununulia speaker. Okay, just go ahead.
Are you hearing me? Is it any better?
Is it okay, Austin? Maybe are you hearing? It's not very clear.
I couldn't get him clearly.
Okay, Steve, when we know nothing, we just say toka urudi. Are you gonna just try and leave and then come back, and then maybe I'll ask Austin to give us a difference, then you come and give us from your point of view. Sawa. Austin, unajua tofauti. Do you know the difference between being religious and being spiritual?
Nitajaribu.
Jikakamue.
So good evening, good morning, everyone. My name is Austin Obulutsa. I am a counseling psychologist based here in Nairobi. And in the course of my work, there are times I have to discuss with my clients some of their thoughts, their views, and beliefs on certain presenting issues that they present with in counseling. So, for example, you would hear clients who come with issues around drugs or drinking. Sometimes you would hear of views about R-rated movies or issues like premarital sex, cohabitation, pornography, promiscuity, domestic violence, piercings, tattoos, and the like. So you'll find, as a therapist, I will have to discuss with the clients about what are their beliefs, what are their views, what are their thoughts. And many a times what happens is that because of that, we end up now talking about religion and spirituality, because for many of them, spirituality and religion really play an important part in their mental health. So in terms of the difference, so you'll find religion most times is it's institutionalized. You have a set of rules, you have a set of beliefs, you have a set of practices, and all these beliefs, attitudes, and practices are geared towards the worship of God or some other supernatural being. On the other hand, spirituality, how I would like to look at it, is an experience of connection to something larger than you, living every day in kind of a sacred manner. So you find that spirituality really is that aspect of our human lives that refers to how we seek and how we express meaning and purpose, and also the way we experience our connectedness to the moment, to ourselves, to others, to nature, and really to the significant or to the sacred higher power that you are believing in. So you'll find a lot of times our religions are based upon lives, teaching, and beliefs of either history or what you would call an archetype. So for example, Christianity, you have Christ, you have Buddha for the Buddhists, then you have Mohammed for the Muslims. Sometimes we talk about Krishna for the Hindus. There's always some kind of archetypal figure that is related to religion. Whereas spirituality really is more about the practical application of these teachings that you get from the religious set of beliefs. So here you look at how am I integrating the meaning and the beliefs into my life. So that's where sometimes I try to discuss with my clients about their religion versus their spirituality. A lot of times also we've realized that many of our clients who come to therapy, they believe in a higher power, almost 100%. We also have a big percentage of our clients who really pray and belong to a religious community. If you do a survey, you'll also find that maybe in the last 7 days or in the last 2 weeks, there are those who have actually participated in a religious activity. So for us as counselors, as psychologists, when we do counselor education and training or psychological education and training, we are told that when you do an assessment, you also have to include a spiritual part in terms of the assessment. So you'll hear of psychiatrists, psychology talking about biopsychosocial / spiritual assessment, that when people come to us presenting their problems or their issues, you could have a biological cause for their problems, you could have a psychological cause, a sociological cause, and you could also have a spiritual cause to their problems. So even as we do treatment and therapy, we also have to integrate spirituality in terms of the treatment interventions. I think that's a good introduction. Back to you, Posa.
Okay, thank you very much. So Steve, take 2.
Yeah, I've had to switch computers here. Is that much better?
Oh my God, I'm almost hugging you over the screen. Yes, it's much better. Okay, from the chaplain. So tell us what a chaplain is, and from your angle, what is spirituality and what is religion, religiosity, whatever. Yeah.
Chaplain is a spiritual care professional. That's what we call it. These days, we actually even use the term spiritual care person or spiritual counselor more than chaplain, because of the reasons that Dr. Austin has explained. Spirituality, a lot of people can identify as being spiritual, while some may not identify as being religious at all. Why? Because religion, to most people, has to do with organization and a set of rules, identifying with a certain group, sticking to some things that they do so that you can be a part of the clique, so to speak. And some people don't like that. So, but almost everyone in this life tries to find or to make meaning out of life, whether it's through religion or through seeking the sacred, or just exploring the intellect to the highest level. So people find meaning in very different ways, even just nature, family, things like that. So that, just as Dr. Austin has explained, it's that's what we define as spirituality. So you find almost everyone in this world is actually spiritual in some way. So chaplains are people that basically leverage on the fact that humanity is spiritual by nature, and we try to meet people where they are and then offer care from there, regardless of what their system of belief is or what where they draw meaning from. And we try to offer help and compassion, or maybe even just be the person that these people have as they walk through a certain journey of life. Ours is not really to come and prescribe or to describe exactly what they should do, but to support them in their own spiritual journey, because you realize people are in different spiritual journeys. Someone can start off as, a lover of nature, and that's where their journey begins from. Another one can start from, intense Judaism. That's what they were taught as a kid, and they're off on a spiritual journey. So for us as chaplains, we try to work with everyone, regardless of religion or whether they're not even religious, just to offer compassion and care, depending on what setting we find ourselves working in. It can be the different places where we could work, ranging from schools. So in a school setting, you try to use, let's say, try to help maybe the students and maybe even the staff rally their spiritual resources to achieve some of the goals they have. There's chaplains who work in the corporate sector. If you go online and look at something like Corporate Chaplains of America, these are people who go into the corporate world and try to offer care, to people in the corporate world. And sometimes they do things as simple as, someone is at work, but, maybe they have a court case somewhere and that's disturbing them while they're at work. And for employers who have engaged, let's say, for instance, corporate chaplains, they can be sure that somebody who cares is there with their family, as maybe a kid is going through a court case or something while they're at work, and they're able to focus better with their work. So that's the setting, let's say, of a corporate chaplain. And there's much more they do. There's a setting, let's say, for instance, of a hospital. A lot of chaplains, especially here in the West, would train in hospitals. Hospitals give a very good setting to train in the aspects of care. And the medical world has really found solutions to some very challenging problems that we don't see solutions in places like, for instance, the church. So let's say if you go and work as a chaplain in a hospital, then you have to work within that hospital setting. And in the hospital settings, I don't know how it works in Kenya. Here, there's a lot of record keeping. Whatever you do, you have to document, you have to chart. And so spiritual care is designed pretty much just like any other form of medical care. So you can have a holistic kind of care, and you have to chart and you have to document. And so along with that comes a lot of privacy issues, which have actually been solved in the medical setting because there's laws that protect these things. I didn't see that working as a pastor at one point, because you would care, but you don't really document. And when you leave, another pastor comes and they're not able to even have a place where they can take, there can be continuity. So in a hospital setting, there's chaplains who work there, caring for sick people, end-of-life people, trauma patients, emergency. Some cases you would even have to just care for the staff, because you would have cases where, especially in the ER emergency units, we have some really traumatic cases that come in, cases of shootings, kids who've been killed and stuff. And these things really affect even the staff, and they're not able to continue working except, they find some form of care, and compassion to help them sort of like carry on. So that's what chaplains do in that setting. There's those who work in prisons. Myself, I work in a hospice with end-of-life patients, which is another area where chaplains or spiritual care professionals work.
Thank you. So now to the matters of the day. Austin, what is spiritual bypassing then?
Thank you for this question. As I was preparing for this session today, I had a discussion with some of my workmates, and there was a big debate about it, because for them, they don't believe that they can be something known as spiritual bypass. We go to our religious institutions for healing and fellowship, so they can never be a form of bypass. But as a terminology, the term spiritual bypass was, according to studies, was first coined by someone known as Wellwood in 1984. And for them, they were describing spiritual bypass as a tendency to use spiritual practices to avoid dealing with certain personal or emotional unfinished business. So you are using spiritual practices to avoid dealing with certain personal or emotional unfinished business. So you'll find here the person is misusing their spiritual life to actually avoid dealing with psychological difficulties. So you could be experiencing difficulties in your relationships, you could be experiencing difficulties in your career, difficulties in your finances, and you then use your spiritual life to avoid dealing with those difficulties that you're experiencing. So at face value, you would think that the person actually has an authentic spiritual maturity, when in fact, they are not willing to actually deal with their experiences. They're not willing to actually confront the problems that they are facing in their life. A lot of times when we do counseling, and as I had mentioned before, we have to do a spiritual assessment as part of the design of intervention. We have to ask someone about their relationship, how they derive meaning in their lives, how they participate in religious practices, so that we're able to see, is the individual avoiding painful and difficult psychological work of old wounds, or are they actually spiritually mature? So that's something that sometimes we ask our clients to think about. For example, a client might report that they use their spare time in church projects and has strong spiritual convictions. They could also be reporting disciplined spiritual practice. They could also be reporting maybe transcendental or transpersonal experiences. But what is not apparent is that this client is actually avoiding, let's say, verbal abuse in their relationship. They could be using that to avoid shame that she associates maybe with their gambling addiction. So at face value, you say, oh, so-and-so is really committed. But at the back of, as we do the assessment, we now realize that this commitment arose because of this psychological problem that they are facing. So of course, there are many things that we try to look at when we do an assessment. But a lot of times you have to look at the individual's coping style. How are they coping with problems? How are they coping with the experiences that they're going through? And based on this, you can be able to see that, is this an adaptive coping style, or is it what you would call spiritual bypassing, the avoidant coping style? And there are many examples that we can think about in terms of the manifestations. And I think as we go along in this discussion, we'll be able to see some of those manifestations.
So, Steve, what is this taught in pastor school? And since you're a chaplain, especially in the States, you're dealing with all manner of people. Are you seeing spiritual bypassing in everyone? Or is it more predominant? Because most of us here are Christians. Is it most predominant in our faith?
Well, thanks, Poso. So the term spiritual bypassing by itself is a lot of pastors, even spiritual care professionals, have not heard about it. So you might find it strange, but it is what it is. I was actually talking with some of my colleagues and telling them that I was going to have this discussion, and turns out like some of them had not even heard about it, So, but they have been addressing it even without knowing that there is such a term as spiritual bypassing or such a concept. But some of them actually knew it, and some of because I work with a very diverse group of chaplains where I work, the hospice that I work with, it's a pretty large hospice, so there's about 7 chaplains from different faith backgrounds. So some of them that are not Christian actually knew about this, you know. and so you know, the advantage of working within such a setting is that it stretches you. It helps you to really see that there's benefits you can receive, you know, by just interacting with people of different faiths, and also by serving, or even people of no faith at all. Some like to call them themselves as such, and also serving people of diverse religious and spiritual backgrounds. So when you talk about theology, depends. Theology really means the study of God, you know. There's people who study theology, and there's others who study religion, others who study spirituality. So depending on the context in which you went to study, you might come across this or not. Within the regular Christian setting where you just study theological studies, rarely would you even come across instances like this until you probably start branching more into chaplaincy. There's thankfully these days specialties that train in chaplaincy, and even try to sub-branch, you know, into what kind of chaplaincy. And so because of that, some of these things you can come across them. The way chaplaincy training is structured, especially in the US, is you have to do what they call clinical pastoral education. And clinical pastoral education, despite the fact that they call it pastoral, is the way it's structured and the way people do it. They do it depending on where you go to do it. You do like a residency, almost like a medical residency in a hospital setting. And the group that you'll be learning with, the professors or spiritual professionals that you'll be learning under, might not be Christian. If they're not Christian, that will even stretch you even more if Christianity is your background. Or even if you're Buddhist, they might not be. You might meet Christians. So it really stretches you. And it's nice because you will be working in a setting where you will meet diverse religious and spiritual exposures. So CPE is one area where, that's clinical pastoral education, where people are likely to be exposed to concepts such as this. And even if they're not really exposed to the actual concept of spiritual bypassing, they will be equipped with the tools to be able to address issues like that, even without knowing that this is exactly what they're dealing with. They might have different names for what they're handling. So there is an element of training that happens. Yeah, so what was the other question? So I'm not forgetting.
Are you seeing it?
Okay.
Because we are largely, are you seeing it in other faiths, and are you also seeing it in the atheists and agnostics?
Okay. So yeah, when you actually look at at spirituality broadly, then you discover that a lot of the people that I care for instance, are very spiritual. So because I approach my work as a spiritual counselor, then I get to expose myself to so many people. If I was going just as a chaplain or a pastor, then some people would clearly say, no, we don't want anything to do with it. But when I explain what spiritual care is like, then I end up having a lot of people I care for. I care for faith traditions, if it's Christianity, you know, the whole spectrum, including the other day, I met a cowboy, somebody that belongs to a cowboy church, you know, which is something I had not even encountered. So I have to do my research on that and then go to care for them. I care for people who do not subscribe to any religion at all, but still have a way that they find meaning in life. I do have a Freemason at the moment that I'm caring for, 33rd degree Mason, who's at the end of life. So those are the kind of broad spectrums that we have to find ourselves in. And yes, if spiritual bypassing is what we have defined as sometimes people trying to avoid some work that needs to be done, yeah, you can actually see it regardless of the faith tradition or religious tradition that people subscribe to or don't subscribe to. In cases, for instance, I think we probably can clearly see how, and I think Saya tried to define in the introduction how Christians, for instance, and that can apply to a lot of other religious circles, maybe do the spiritual bypassing. What's harder to see is how, let's say, for instance, atheists would probably do it. But atheists are very spiritual. Why? Because they have a very high regard for intellectualism and rationality and things like that. And they value this so much. They find a lot of meaning in this. And so you see, in that setting, the reality of life is that life is not only intellectual, and rational. Life is also emotional, and so what we see in settings like that, for instance, is a tendency to not put the importance of emotions at the same level as, for instance, the intellect. So trying to process everything intellectually while trying to numb the emotions that are calling, So in such a way, you might find someone who's even atheistic or agnostic actually doing a spiritual bypassing, because emotional stuff can give meaning. That's how people fall in love. And that's how they find meaning in life sometimes. Love may not be very intellectual, but it can be very meaningful in life. So that's an example of maybe how I can encounter it in such settings.
Sire, John Newell coined this word in 1984. Does that mean before that we were not spiritually bypassing? And now, because your fake pastor hat is off, were we doing it in the African setting also when we were traveling from the Congo, from following the Nile to come to our current home?
Yeah, I'm immediately demoted from a fake pastor, and now I'm just the African traditional religion commentator.
Yes.
Things siblings make you do. Feels like two fields. One, a couple of fields. Feels like immunology, certain aspects of psychology, being that they have developed post-language, like after the language has developed, they look for the language to put on things they're discovering. So, for instance, let me go on a detour to explain something. The name dinosaur it's a created name. It just means big lizard. It's a case where we had to use language to try and describe a phenomenon. Not that the phenomenon, we'd been finding these big bones and huge lizard structures all along, but it took some time for somebody to come up with the name dinosaur. In ancient times, they probably have called what we call dinosaur dragon. It fits very well. So again, that's why, though the term is coined in 1984, it doesn't mean the phenomenon is not observed before that. It's just that it's one of those cases where language preceded the formal structuring around it. Were we doing it? Yes, as long as humanity, spiritual bypassing is at its core a crutch system. So whenever people are struggling with coping with anything, when the challenge is bigger than the resources they have, or when they are opting to deal with a challenge using set habits or trusted things, or when they're just not up to it to level up, they will turn to whatever thing they know. So if I'm an academic and I'm facing a certain struggle, I'm either not able or to face it, or willing to face it, or feel well-equipped to face it, I'll turn to my books. So I'll bury myself deeper and deeper in the books. If I'm an athlete in a similar situation, I'll just bury myself deeper and deeper in the athleticism. In the case of an academic, I'll look like I'm really with it. Currently, the movie Oppenheimer is going on. And when you read the history, for instance, of Oppenheimer, he was socially very awkward, and he was cruel before he made the bomb and after he made the bomb. But for the period he was working on the Manhattan Project, he was a really good person. The people really liked him and stuff. And it's because he finally found something to immerse himself that made him be able to deal with many other things he should have dealt with. So my broad way of saying, human beings, as long as they've existed, when the challenge is bigger than their coping strategies or tools, or when they have something they trust, they will tend to over-leverage, overextend, overuse something that would otherwise be good, but now when overextended and overused becomes a problem. That's my long answer to the question about timing of the name and existence of the practice. Were we always spiritually bypassing? Yes, certainly we were. When you read the stories of the African structure, you find, for instance, military wars, the military victories were won on the basis of numbers, on strategy, and on weaponry. Shaka, for instance, by changing from the long spear to the shortened spear, the assegai, was able to unleash quite some terror. I don't know, I've lately been really focusing on Shaka, but your brother had quite some terror to unleash. And when Shaka beats an army, instead of the army going back and looking at their strategies, the defeated army looking at their strategies, they would probably go by and blame their witch doctor or their medicine person, or they'd go and double the amount of sacrifice they need to do, when none of those really was where the issue is. It was a question of discipline, unity, and strategy. And every time armies got those things correct, they were able to rebuff and keep moving. A second area is, for instance, in things like disease, or when there was long-term pestilence or famine, or when there were instances of things that were undesirable, like barrenness and stuff. Right now, with advancing medical stuff, we probably know some of those women were probably having fibroids, or they were having a problem with their cysts and ovaries and stuff, which tools of science could be able to help. And true science and true religion agree because they have the same author. All truth is God's truth because it's the author of all truth. But you see, back then, a woman like this would be taken through elaborate cleansing ceremonies, and they would have to take refuge within their faith or within their spirituality, within the African setting, to at least help them get by. And they would see this either as a curse from the gods or something about the ancestors. And people would do very elaborate things to try and appease the ancestors, when really what it was a medical problem, by and large. So same thing, like if we now know the earth has gone through various cycles and all of you, and that could be affecting the famine and the lack of water, or simply it was a case of overgrazing. You people have overgrazed and you're pastoralists, and what you need to do is to move to another place. But individuals would do, if you did high school the same year I did, they'll do things like what Mokgobja did in the story, looking for a rain god, including child sacrifice, to try and appease some rain gods to be able to send rain. And yet now we know that child sacrifice had no correlation whatsoever to the ability to bring rain. So as long as human beings have existed, and as long as human beings have had issues to cope with that have overstretched their ability and resources, or they have a preferred way to cope, human beings have always tried to spiritually bypass many of the issues they confront.
Okay, and I think I want to start with you also, Saya. So let's practically let's give what are these examples of spiritually bypassing that we use in our day-to-day lives, like like take it to the Lord in prayer when you're supposed to just go to hospital. What are, from your end, what you can pick your pet spiritual bypass example.
So in the run-up to this meeting, I put up a post that I crowdfunded examples of spiritual bypassing, and on my personal page, you can be able to see them. And it's from as simple things as your church's PA is bad. It's an electronic question. Your building is poorly designed. It has echoes from here to Timbuktu. And rather than invest in a proper good PA, or get within your congregations people who understand sound, you're busy praying about it. Like prayer won't do it. I'm thinking Joshua in the Bible had to be called out from his spiritual bypassing. They've gone out to war, and they've gotten a serious routing from a small tribe. And after a whole day of prayer, God comes, and his answer is not like, I've heard your prayer. He actually begins by asking him, why are you praying? The problem is there's sin in the camp. You need to go and address. Some guys have violated my way. So God had to call Joshua from a period of spiritual bypassing. Joshua was, now let me say this. Many people who spiritually bypass are extremely well-meaning, like Joshua was well-meaning, but God had to call him out and tell him like, no, this one will need prayer. You need to go and do the following things. I'm thinking of individuals who are, you desire marriage, you've not been married, or are getting suitors, and rather than praying and then going to places where you can meet the kind of people who you're looking for, you're busy spending your time more and more in prayer, nights of prayer in a forest where no one will ever be able to see you. You're probably spiritually bypassing. You are, somebody is sick, like genuinely sick. And we have not yet even found a diagnosis, like what's wrong. We just know they are unwell. And rather than take them to the hospital and have them diagnosed and find the proper treatment, would rather keep them home and wait on the Lord in prayer. That's, you're spiritually bypassing. You probably are scared of the diagnosis or of the bill, or you are over leveraging prayer, or you misunderstand God's repertoire of the ability to heal. A couple is quarreling, they're having communication problems, which is affecting their ability to blend well. And rather than them being able to seek counsel, and counsel does not just mean from a marriage counselor, it could mean from men and women of experience and even faith to be able to walk with them, they'd rather stay with their problems and bring it to the Lord in prayer. They've been bringing it to the Lord in prayer, and rather than talk to each other, they talk to each other through prayer. So you get to know your wife's qualms through the prayer and the praying, and the same for your husband. That's spiritual bypassing. You are in school, and the objective of being in school is you need to study to get good grades, but you've in your mind formed this quid pro quo with God, like, God, if I give you this amount of time, you will give me good grades. So instead of spending time in the lab or in the library, you're busy spending time on mission trips. And disproportionately, I went for mission trips, and I'm okay with people spending some of their college time in mission trips, but I'm saying that's all you ever do. You're always going only for prayer and fasting and mission trips, and you're not reading, and you're not going to the lab. And then you somehow expect that you'll walk into the exam room and be able to nail the exam. What's more likely to happen is for you to say, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, my God, why have you forsaken me, when you finally see that exam paper in front of you. Your children are struggling with the challenges of adolescence, and rather than sit with them and just talk with them through or get them the help they need. You're busy binding the spirits of stubbornness and coming, decreeing and declaring against, whichever ancestral. No, it's a developmental stage. You do need to lift them before the Lord in prayer. And then when you're done with prayer, you need to sit down with them and talk. You're at the workplace, and instead your productivity is not what it should be. You suck at Excel, or you're not good at your PowerPoint stink. And instead of you being able to turn and get the help you need, you'd rather pray over the matter. No, what you need is a webinar and a workshop on how to get your Excel skills properly done. Skipping lunch to pray and fast over your Excel skills will not be able to make your PowerPoint or your Excel better. So I could go, and I think one mega spiritual bypassing we're probably doing right now as a Kenyan country is when we have economic problems, and instead of choosing the right leaders, people who understand how to run an economy and how to run a system, and instead of us being able to hold them to task when they're not delivering, and us being able to ask, like, where's the money coming from? Where's it going? How are we spending? Balancing the books. Instead of doing all of that and instead investing in prayer is spiritual bypassing. We just don't want to confront the fact that we are corrupt, that we are not very accountable, that we have not chosen the best and the brightest to lead us, and we would rather hide behind prayer than come to confront such things at a national level. I could go on, but those would be some examples that come to mind.
We may need to send someone to guard our parents because of what Saya has just said. I declare we are not, you see from our last names, we are not siblings anymore. Okay, and so the same question. So Austin, what examples, practical examples, so that people, we can intellectualize this conversation, but yote tisa kumi, the practical examples, what are you seeing people, examples from your clinical side? How do they, how does it show up, the spiritual bypassing?
I think one of the things I have seen, especially in situations of grief, you would hear relatives or friends telling the person who has been bereaved that the deceased is in a better place, and that it was all part of God's plan. So of course, it's for me, I think that's an example of bypassing, spiritual bypassing, because when you experience grief, you have to go through your grieving process. So whether you tell me, if the person is in a better place or it was all part of God's plan, there are many questions that can come out, like, if it was God's plan, why is God planning to force suffering on orphans or on loved ones? Another example, sometimes when we talk about relationship boundaries, so you'll find in counseling, there are many times we discuss boundaries, how individuals form boundaries in their relationships. And so sometimes you'll hear of family members that would be complaining that their boundaries are being violated by other family members. And rather than confront the boundary violators, and when they try to confront them, what happens is that the boundary violators will tell them that they are being overly intolerant, or they're being insensitive, or you find an individual represses their anger. So instead of dealing with the issue, they just repress their anger. And for me, I think that's also another form of bypass. Another one is, like, for example, you express your emotions about something or about what someone has done to you. And when you try to state your feelings, instead of the other person understanding you, they say you're being negative. Can you stop being negative? So of course, we also hear about, like, for example, when you, like, I have worked, let's say, with the LGBTQ clients, and sometimes when they try to express themselves in terms of them feeling violated, they would hear others telling them, can you be civil or can you be polite? Can you be patient that this, your situation is not legal in this country? Of course, for me, then I realized that sometimes also this is some kind of spiritual bypassing. So there are certain euphemisms or statements that we hear in our daily relationships that I also think can be interpreted, depending on how you look at it, can be interpreted as a form of spiritual bypass. For example, someone is going through problems, going through issues, and then you tell them thoughts and prayers. I don't know if that is a form of bypass, but sometimes I think it could be. Someone also could be going through problems or issues and you respond to them, good vibes only. I don't want to hear any negative things. I just want to listen to good vibes. You go through a negative situation and someone replies and says it was for the best. I also think that can be a form of bypass. The one that is very, very popular amongst Kenyans, you would hear everything happens for a reason. I also find that as a form of bypass. And then amongst our young generation these days, we hear of people saying, you create your own happiness. I think also that can be a form of bypass because when you listen to these statements, some call them euphemisms, others will call them platitudes. If you listen to this, you're going through something and someone gives you these kinds of statements, one might wonder, is it comforting? Are you going to get any insight out of it? Or is it a way of the speaker dismissing a difficult situation that you are experiencing because they are not able to discuss it with you, or they are not able to help you cope with that situation? So those are some of the examples that I can reflect from my practice.
Okay, Steve, any examples reflecting from your practice also? Especially because you are with a end of life care, people still saying it's God's will and someone has a tumor the size of a football.
Yeah, I think the other panelists have touched a little bit on the aspects of grief, some of the common ones that we meet. But I think in hospice care, one of the things that we rarely encounter, but because I straddle both fields as a chaplain and also as a chaplain, as a pastor, I see a big difference in terms of how people approach conversations about death or around death. When you come into hospice, you have no choice but to confront the fact that death is actually approaching. That's how you have actually come into hospice, because every patient that gets admitted into hospice has got, medical prognosis about 6 months or less. And so we have, if we are lucky, we have that much time to work with the family, sometimes a little longer, but sometimes it's not we don't have that much time. So what I have observed, even within the setting of the hospice, is that there is a lot of difficulty when it comes to holding conversations around death. And I mean, each of us, from the time we are born and we come into this life and we develop consciousness and understanding, one of the things we become very aware of is that we will die at some point. But despite the fact that even the Bible, talking of a Christian setting, tells us to teach us to number our days, that we let us pray so God can teach us to number our days and apply our hearts to wisdom, we still find it very difficult to talk about death, to prepare for death. And it is a reality that is coming. So each of us would wait until that time when it has happened, and then it's a crisis for everyone, because we did some serious spiritual bypassing. So now we are confronted with what was inevitable, and now we have to source for funds, we have to find a casket, we have to find, a place to bury someone. Especially this is very sad in the African setting, because people just don't want to talk about death, because we tend to think that if we talk about death, we will hasten death. But I think that is a serious form of spiritual bypassing, and it's probably that is some spirituality, some spiritual kind of belief, that thinking that because we will talk about death, it will bring death. Not talking about it will not stop it. Okay, it will still come. It will still come, and so that's one of the most serious cases where I see, especially the African community, is really struggling. I've seen it in my own family as well, where it's just hard to even converse, even though I daily work with with end of life patients and help people prepare for end of life and their families as well, including even conducting funerals within my own cultural setup and families. It's just almost an abomination. And you wonder, what it's going to take to actually come to the realization that this is a fact. We need to prepare for it, and no amount of having faith in God will make us escape the reality that at one point we will all die, and our people will die, and we need to prepare for it. So I have seen even non-believers, so to speak, prepare better, for their end of life. I've seen people who profess that they do not have any faith, in God, be more at peace when at the time of death than people who believe that they're going to a better place. So there's a bit of a disconnect, and I think we can learn from different cultures. So that for me is one area that I see avoiding death conversations. The other area I see is toxic. Some people have given it the name of toxic positivity, and I think my colleagues have touched on it a little bit. Trying to just, I don't know how best I can describe this, but always being positive, and it's been brought about by a certain culture of certain empowerment books, and stuff people read, and you must be positive in life for you to achieve and for you to develop. Look, bro, it's okay. We are human. We have bad days. Life can be rough. Sometimes you just need to accept the fact that life is rough. You're having a grumpy day, and let someone comfort you. Go grab some ice cream or something. Feel better, and then get back to the grind of life. And sometimes that works better than trying to just force some positivity on yourself that is really not even working. So that's an area that I see. In the Christian circles, I see a leaning towards, faith so much so that we don't even have a balance, like we, it's like we elevate certain things at the expense of others, or something that can be neutral, we turn it to be so positive. Something like faith. Faith is a good thing, but it can be a bad thing. It just depends on what faith you're having. Who are you having faith in? What are you having faith in, And so there's a whole context of discussions around that. So if you bring up a discussion, for instance, of the importance of doubt within a religious circle, some people might even immediately walk away. But even the Bible tells us, test every spirit. How can you test every spirit without a measure of a little bit of doubt? So even doubt has its place. I'm not saying we should always be very doubtful or anything, but how can you be cautious, without an element of doubting, and that's how people get deceived and duped, by trusting people too much. We are dealing with things like Shakahola. If someone had doubted a little bit, and probably processed their doubts to the fullest extent, they probably would have saved their lives, Again, the issue of fear versus courage. Sometimes we pick and cherry pick and choose. We like passages like, "Have I not commanded you to be strong and courageous?" And so we don't own our feelings of fear and also affirm it, let's say from the scriptures, for instance. it's the same scriptures that say, fear the Lord, and give him glory. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. So yeah, there's a place for courage, and there's also a place for fear. And these are all feelings that God has created, and they serve a special purpose. And so when we do not process these things properly and in the proper context, we end up doing some spiritual bypassing that can be damaging. One of the other areas that I have seen our current society is beginning to struggle with is in the question of love versus hate. Sometimes people might easily, whenever you're confronting difficult issues, we're living in a society that is quick to label that as hate. And labeling hate as something really bad, and labeling love generally as something really good. But they're both just, very neutral. It just depends on who you are loving or who you're hating. In fact, the Bible gives a very nice instance in the book of Hebrews where Jesus is demonstrated as having hate. Hate for what? Hate for iniquity. So you see, there is a justified form of hate. There can be a justified form of anger. And so when we experience this toxic positivity, I'll always be a loving person, I'll always be, a person of faith, I'll always, we are not, for me, I don't usually see that balance. Sometimes I try to question, I'm like, okay, are you owning the fact that you might be dealing with some fears? You might have to make space for some hate, let me not go into more detailed examples. So those are some of the areas that I see. I see conflict avoidance, for instance. People always preaching peace at the expense of, and it comes at a very huge cost. Whereas, a little bit of conflict can straighten some things out. And so there's a lot of conflict avoidance. I see, for instance, race issues at the moment, playing out within certain church settings, especially here in the States. There's tribe issues which are playing out in certain church settings or religious settings in Africa. And sometimes people would focus more on retaining peace, but that will not solve the problem. You're bypassing a serious problem that can only be dealt with by confrontation and a little bit of conflict for it to be solved. Otherwise, you will just be pacifying this to a point where it has simmered so much that the cup will just blow off, and it will be explosive. It will be hard to manage it at that point. So for me, that's where I see these issues playing out, both in the chaplaincy setting and also within the pastoral areas that I straddle.
Yes, people are uncomfortable sitting in discomfort. They want to always be pacified. Saya, this is a Mashakura question, so just come because you're the one who does all my Mashakura.
One more before Saya.
Okay, go ahead.
Just one more. I think I'd forgotten. I see a lot of mission efforts, but mission should be contextual. What is the need that the community has that you're going to? So going to a remote place to just plant a church without helping them address, the actual issues that they're dealing with will not be the most successful way to reach that community. So planting churches can be okay, but in an area where people are dealing with economic problems, with joblessness, with things like that, shouldn't we be mostly, going to plant some companies, some projects? Because when you have, let's say, a business and you've planted it somewhere, you have, you have 5-6 days to influence people, as opposed to a church where you just have one day and maybe just a few hours. You have more time. You can impact more people like that. So for me, I think that's a serious area. I see some bypassing happening, where we see so many more churches springing up in an area where what people need. It's not that people in Africa are not spiritual. It's not like they are not religious. It's not like they do not love God. It's not like what we need is more churches. We actually need more solutions to the economic problems that we have. And I think we need to focus more on that.
Okay, thank you.
Juan, before you hit me with your Mashakura question, just to syndikiza Steve's point, there are mission work is a brilliant place for spiritual bypassing at two levels. For the guys in, say in Africa, you find most of, for instance, rural or remote mission work is carried out by individuals from urban settings. I'm not opposed to that, but you find in many cases, it's one of two things that happen. A, they have neglected the mission needs and the community needs within their urban settings, okay, completely. And what they're going for often in rural settings is for, will sound bad, but let me put this in quote, easy pickings. What one person said, a struggler here or a struggler there. You know, if I can just go to a place and inoculate some herdsmen's cows and wow them with a drone, and then they'll come and I will gospel bomb them, then we can be able to baptize, put a church, as Steve has said, and move. And you find very often this is individuals who they are using the rural mission to overcompensate for personal and also communal inadequacies they have in being able to do urban proper work. Now, by no shape or means am I suggesting that rural missions are bad, but I'm just calling for things to happen in a balance. So then the second one is, you find there's a lot of movement from people in the West, you know, whether it's the US, the Europe, coming from there to do again mission work in Africa. And many times they come and they'll be doing mission work in the same rural places, some pastoralist communities, some people who appear poor, but the more I've hung out with pastoralist communities, the more I'm realizing they're not poor. They just define wealth very differently. And in a similar setting, it is people who are living the West that really needs a lot of the very same spiritual goods that are being removed from the West to reach. And so there's a lot of unentered, enriched places within the West, within America, within Europe, but individuals who are trying to, they're either tired or afraid of the cultural wars in the West, would rather come to Latin America or Africa, where there's a bit more openness and susceptibility to the Christian faith, and they want to go there. And what if you carefully step back and look at it, it's partly self-pacifying, okay, and becomes an excellent tool for spiritual bypassing, in the sense, instead of confronting the cultural moments and the cultural needs and the human needs of the Western spaces they come from, many individuals would rather go to Africa. And it's what you can achieve in Africa in 2 weeks or 3 weeks because of the power of the euro or of the sterling or of the pound or of the dollar versus our local currencies is amazingly way more. And so when you eventually come to the West, you're like, wait a minute, this place needs a lot more evangelism than back home. We're actually probably way better. And so you begin realizing, just the same way guys leave Nairobi to go to some remote place in Turkana or Pokot, is probably the same way individuals leave the States or Europe to come to preach in Africa. They need a little more work done here. Now you can give me your Mashakura question.
Now that you've syndicated me, if it's okay, let me syndikiza even further.
Austin anza kupanga kwa kichwa, inakaa watu wanasindikizana.
You know, these are very difficult conversations, and sometimes you just pray and hope for an opening like this, where sometimes you can, you know, talk a little further. You know, when we're talking of mission work, let's say, for instance, even in, you know, missionaries coming from places as far as maybe here in the States and going to Africa to evangelize, maybe our brothers and sisters in Africa may not understand the depth of what Saya is trying to say of, you know, it's a good thing, and we are asked to go to the ends of the earth, but sometimes you notice that there's it smells of spiritual bypassing when you look at the details. When you look at the details, when you look at the level of neglect that is happening, you know, within. Okay, for instance, you know, why go to evangelize in a faraway tribe when, for instance, within America itself, did you know that America has local tribes, you know, local, and these are conversations I've been beginning to have. It might sound very tense, but there were actually local communities that were here, you know, and they have been pushed to reservations. There's 500 of them federally recognized, 500. Those are federally recognized, you're not even dealing with the others that are state recognized, but have not been federally recognized for many political reasons. But it's very hard for the Christian community here to confront these issues, but it's easier for them to go and do mission work in Africa, you know, and plant churches. Why? Because there's some work that needs to be done here. The same thing that happened in Africa in terms of colonization, and thankfully maybe God intervened and saved Africa a little bit. It did not happen here, and this is an issue that is brewing, you know, under the carpets, where you have people whose land, you know, has been taken and they're still in reservations. Unajua, ukisikia ile ati naendanga reserve, I am going to reserve. That is what was happening in Africa. That was what you're being prepared for your land to be taken and for you to be taken huko ndani. So there are very, very hard issues that are brewing in settings like this. So people sometimes find it easier to leave and go, you know. It's a very devastating, very disconcerting form of spiritual bypass that has happened on such a huge scale, such huge scale, and has left so much damage to certain communities over here. Just the other day, you know, I was finding out, not to go too much off track, I was finding out of a tribe that had to fundraise 125 million to buy just 12,000 acres, buy back their own land here in America, just here in Snoqualmie, just to buy back their land, you know. And these are issues, you know, so we can be comfortable telling people about the promised land while people do not have a present land. You see what I'm trying to say? It is very, very saddening, a very saddening case scenario. And these issues are here, and they're also quite at home. So anyway, just to drum the point home of what Saya is trying to talk about, you might not realize how serious that issue is, but it is really serious.
Yes, it's spiritual bypass because it's very uncomfortable seeing the poverty that's here, and you want to pacify your soul, and so you go elsewhere where you can be a missionary. I mean, at least we are starting the conversation. Okay, the Mashakura question. So Saya, I want you to touch on this, the new age spirituality, you know, the vibrations and nyota yako haijaonekana that has seeped into the spiritual bypass language, seeped into especially the Christianity and what social media and what is it called, ile evangelism ya pesa inaitwaje?
Prosperity gospel.
Yes, and prosperity gospel. Yeah. So nyota, the vibrations and seeing the new moon and all that has seeped into our language, and we're using it a lot to spiritually bypass. And the effect of prosperity gospel on the whole thing. It's a Mashakura question, but go ahead.
Yeah.
And explain the nyota thing to other people. It's not astrology, Lizzie. It's something different. Okay, go ahead, Saya.
Need a meeting with my mother why my sister treats me this way. So also for the people who don't understand the nyota, let me explain so that you get. So there's the your star, nyota is star. It just means something that holds your fate or your fortune or your luck. It's a teaching that there are forces, or what is your fate, fortune, or ability, or your doors opening is encapsulated in this terminology called nyota, your star. And that through certain mechanisms, your star can be cleaned or unleashed. Or it's possible for some spurious power, some malicious force to block your star. And by so doing, it means either your business or your career or your children or whatever is not doing well. The teaching goes as far as to suggest that you have multiple stars. So you have a star for your career, a star for your marriage, a star for your doors to be opened, the respective star needs to be unlocked. So for those who are trying to understand what nyota and everything here means, it's different from Western astrology that happens. So what's the effect? So one thing is language. Language is the dress of ideas, and words have meaning. And that is why the founders of people like Christ and Paul were very clear and very choosy on what language they used to express. They had access to quite an amount of terms and ideas within their time. They only picked the concepts and ideas from around them that were in harmony with their Christian frame of reference. And they discarded or avoided or didn't use ideas, concepts, and ways and frames of reference that were out of harmony with the Christian message or the biblical teaching. And this was useful in helping keep biblical teaching and Christian values very distinct, so that it became very clear, lest by misappropriating or importing in ideas from the outside world into Christianity, it would be very confusing for the converts and even for the people who are the Judaizers. It would be very confusing when you try to mash this. So in a certain sense, New Age thought is antithesis. It's not in harmony with Christianity. It does not believe in a personal God. It believes more in a force. It does not believe in fully the action of free will as is taught within Christianity. And therefore its nomenclature, its language expresses its belief. However, over time, partly from well-meaning but misguided individuals, and also partly from individuals who, in their sincere attempt to probably build bridges between Christianity and surrounding religions, decided to begin importing Eastern thought and New Age philosophy and applying both the language and the concepts into Christianity. We have produced language that is language and practices. Consequently, remember, language is the dress of ideas. So we've been able to import language and practices into Christianity that were never envisioned with biblical Christianity, and that are just completely antithetical to true Christianity. So things like mysterious forms of prayer. Jesus was very clear. For instance, he said, when you pray, not if you pray. He says, when you pray, let's go, take yourself into the closet, talk to your Father. Basically, prayer in the Christian sense is talking to God as to a friend. But in the spiritual thing, it's more of a sensation, it's more of a feeling. And the reason is because you're not speaking to God, a person, as is in the case of Christianity, but in New Age, you're speaking to a force, a power, and God can be in anything, in a tree, in a stone, in you, in all over around. So there's more essence about feeling and all of that. And so the practices that go with that, once I've been making a steady seepage into certain expressions of Christianity, have blurred the lines. But blurring the lines, it does not only restrict itself to the practices, it is also now to what true Christianity means. I like what the biblical prophet, for instance, says. He says, this is what true fasting, this is what true religion that is acceptable to God is. He says, true religion is this, that you will unshackle those that are in slavery, that you will visit those that are in need, that you will loosen those that are oppressed. Jesus himself says, when he gives us the marking scheme of what judgment day will be, he said, I was sick, did you visit me? I was in jail, did you come to check me out? I was hungry, did you feed me? I was a stranger, did you take me in? Like, in his expression of what true Christianity is, Christ was less about the mystique expression, but more of the practical ramifications of it. So what this mashing up of Eastern thought, New Age, both ideas and practices have made Christianity deviate quite substantially in the places where it's practiced. This mix-up is practice. It makes it deviate from what true Christianity is, which is talking to God as to a friend, seeking his counsel and everything, and then being strengthened from there to do his will through us, to becoming something that is just more about felt experience. And it makes prayer and all of those experiences become periods of escape rather than becoming periods of seeking clarity and finding God's will. The whole idea of, therefore, coming, the next natural revelation of this being the whole nyota thing that I've taken time to explain. One of the things it robs the individual of is agency. You know, when I tell you the reason you're not performing well in school is because your star, you know, when you say star, it doesn't sound the same. Nyota, your nyota for academics needs to be cleaned. Why am I studying? If the whole thing is my star is not, if my business is not doing well, probably because I didn't do a proper business case or my business practices are not sound. What probably I need to get things going is better entrepreneurship training, okay? But if I'm told why your business is not doing well is because your nyota for business needs to be cleaned, or somebody has sat on your nyota for biashara, or you need to see person X or preacher Y to pray for your nyota for biashara, I am denied. I'm denied of the opportunity to gain the real tools that I do require. And something needs repeating that I've said before. All truth, all true truth is God's truth, regardless of where it's found. So if what is true about my business is that I need to understand how to read a business case, I need to be better at operations. If that is true, then that is God's truth. It may come from a business school, but what I need at that point as a Christian or as a believer is business empowerment. What I don't need is another night in some forest and a preacher praying for my business star. I'll still come back to my stinking business habits and I will still do badly. And what's worse is I will come back having been robbed of agency because I'm coming back to my school or to my marriage or to my career or to my whichever space with the belief that my fate and my agency is tied up in a star and some spiritual force somewhere is locking it away. That's really not God's way. The third question you asked was about then the effect of things like prosperity evangelism. It reduces Christianity to transaction. It makes the relationship with God more of a quid pro quo, like, God, I will give you tithe and you will give me X or Y. You give me a car, you give me a house, you give me fame, you give me whatever other thing. What that does is it's dangerous, as it's both ridiculous, very unbiblical, but also very dangerous in these senses. Because number one, what it does is it makes God culpable, or it creates a God who's culpable for crimes. You know, a God who you're told will just suddenly deposit money in your bank is a God who's creating inflation. He couldn't have revealed to people the rules of economic management and then go right round the way and just begin depositing millions randomly in people's accounts. This God who's been able to reveal the secrets of medicine, and then suddenly he is undermining the very medicine principles he's taught people because of some prosperity thing is inconsistent. He's a God who's very inconsistent, and is also very culpable of many other things. The good thing is that is not the God of the Bible. This is just something we have been able to create. If God is going to be dishing out money, he should be jailed because he's messing up economic systems. If God is going to be just dishing out land from nowhere, he needs to be jailed because he is not respecting even what he himself created in the Old Testament, where people have land rights. If God is just going to be dishing out grades for people who did not study, he should be jailed, because why did he empower other people to be teachers and lecturers to instruct individuals when he knows he'll bypass all those people and just begin giving grades to individuals all over the place? If God is just going to be miraculously teleporting husbands and wives into people's lives, he needs to be done away with, because then why did he create human beings as social beings to be able to interact with each other? So the net effect of prosperity evangelism is, at one point, it creates a God who's basically a criminal, okay, who's very transactional. But then number two, it does the very thing the whole Nyota business does. It robs the individual of agency. It makes them believe that by dropping a few coins or doing some modern acts of penance or religiosity towards God, takes the place of doing duty. Let me use that ridiculous example, but very true. Your church needs an interior sound engineer to come and sort it out for its echoes. But if all you're being told is, if you just drop a few coins and you pray and fast, the echoes will go, it does not change the situation. Your marriage really needs to heal from father wounds and mother wounds, and it basically needs recovery from narcissism. But if all you're being told is, if you're going to give so much money and be given oil and water from God knows where, and you sprinkle upon your thing, you're going to be well. God is nothing more than a necromancer or a magician in that particular situation. And you're robbed of agency because you believe what you need is that water and not training your tongue. What you need is that oil and not taming your attitude. What you need is that handkerchief and not some serious therapy. So it robs agency and makes individuals perpetuate in this particular thing. And then finally, it misrecommends. That's a word I've just formed now. It misrecommends faith to the public square. True biblical faith, at least as portrayed by Jesus and Paul and Peter and John, combines faith and reason. It's both very intelligent and then it is very experiential. It has both. But one thing that prosperity evangelism does is it vacates the entire Christian experience from the element of reason. So people do things that even you sit back and you're like, that's completely unreasonable, okay? And when that kind of faith is presented in the public square, and you almost notice I'm a bit upset, it's because I know true Christianity is one of the best forces of change the world has ever seen. True Christianity that blends faith and works. But when it is polluted by elements of prosperity evangelism, what it does is it makes people look at it as, this thing is completely unreasonable. It's for the fringe elements. And what they do is they take the baby Christianity with its bathwater and throw it all out. And so what that does is it denies the public space a very important voice and a very important force, which is the principles of true Christianity. True Christianity was at the back of science, Renaissance. It was at the heart of hospice work and a lot of our healthcare work. It was at the heart of the formation of most of modern Western democracies, because at true Christianity, when it's balanced, is a work of beauty. But then now elements like this whole Nyota business and the whole prosperity evangelism, by removing the element of reason from faith, make it something that is completely unpalatable, something that is completely, I wouldn't even blame any person who does not want to engage with such a faith, because even I don't want to engage with such a faith. So as a network of spiritual bypassing, those three elements are profound, they're heavily used, but then at the end of the day, what they produce is more harmful than the supposed good it does. Back to you, Paul. I hope I did Dimashakura your question well.
Now, Kakasirika on the this piece, we will put it as a YouTube short. Okay.
It's okay, Kasarika. That's exactly what we are talking about. If some things are not going right in the spiritual arena or religious arena, it's okay to be angry. I support I support Saya. I was also getting a bit angry and worked up, when I was talking about some of the major large-scale spiritual bypassing issues I've seen. And you see, this is what we need to reckon with, unless you have that level of, even the Bible, justifies it, there's such a thing as righteous, indignation or anger, So it's fine. It's fine. I think it's nice we're having a demonstration of that even within this setting. Thanks, Saya, for demonstrating.
Austin, put back your psych cap on. So are there people who are more prone to spiritual bypassing? Like a narcissist, I don't know, attachment style, anything? Are there people who are more prone or to this kind of phenomenon? Kizungu inaenda.
So I think you can talk about it in the form of personality differences that can manifest spiritual bypassing. That is one of the ways of looking at those who are prone and those who are not prone. Another way of looking at it is to look at age. There are certain age groups that are more prone to bypassing. It's very common maybe with young adults, teenagers who are just getting into their own intellectual, like their brain is developing and are now able to understand issues. Then you find those also with the coping styles, who's they're facing problems, and then in terms of coping, they have maybe you'll call a negative coping style. So you'll find they can also get into bypass. Then there are those who would have attachment styles that are avoidant. There are those who experience a lot of anxiety, especially there's a form of anxiety that we call existential anxiety. When people start asking themselves questions about meaningfulness of life, they start asking themselves about death and dying and such kind of questions. So you find they also get to engage in spiritual bypass. We also have individuals who experienced childhood trauma, developmental trauma. So of course, that also makes them prone to spiritual bypass. Then also we have individuals with the magical thinking, enlightenment. They also are prone to spiritual bypass. We also have individuals who are in substance use recovery and have started going to what we call 12-step programs, Alcoholic Anonymous or Gambling Addiction Anonymous. So again, you find because these 12-step programs are spiritual, you find that because they now start to get into a bypass to avoid dealing with the issues of, that they had because of their addiction. So you find in such instances, when the individual comes for help, we have to do a number of interventions just to be able to help them understand the issues that they are engaging in. I see a question on the chat box.
What's magical thinking?
What is magical thinking? So a person believes, or rather they wish someone well, and then something bad happens to that person. And then you start to engage in magical thinking. Like you say, I believe that those specific words, if I had not said those specific words or those specific emotions or thoughts, and then my thoughts or my words or my feelings actually influenced what happened in reality. So it's like transforming your thoughts to reality. So you find I'm thinking bad about you and then something bad happens to you. Or I'm thinking good about you and then something good happens to you. That's my understanding of magical thinking. It's like I would be saying, because I thought well for you, then I caused something good to happen to you. Another one is you're having abdominal symptoms And then you tell yourself, if I ignore these symptoms, the symptoms will go away. Another one is that if I want something bad enough, it will come to me. So I want to make profit in my business. I really want profit in my business. Then the profit will come to me instead of actually working towards building profit in the business. If I don't talk about my past, it won't have an impact on me. That's another example of magical thinking. So you find here, people avoid to have discussions about their past. They could be in relationships, they could be in families. They could also just, as individuals, be avoiding to talk about their past and thinking that it won't have an impact on their present life. So those are some of the examples of magical thinking. So as I was saying, when you come now for intervention, usually your counselor or your spiritual care professional or your psychiatrist, there are certain things that they're going to do with you in order to help you deal with the spiritual bypass. One of those techniques is an interviewing methodology. We call it motivational interviewing. So in motivational interviewing, it's a belief, it's a methodology that we use in counseling or also in psychotherapy, just to help an individual to look at certain dimensions of motivation. What is it that motivates you to behave the way you do? What is it that motivates you to make the changes that you desire? What is it that motivates you to seek for positive changes in your life? So first, we first help you by understanding you. So here we talk about expressing empathy. So as a therapist, I need to express empathy. I need to understand where you are coming from. I need to express to you that I'm understanding the experiences that you are going through, to tell you that whatever you are going through could be actually normal reactions to different situations. So I help you to look at that by expressing empathy. The other issue that I help you to do is that I help you to develop what you call a discrepancy. So here, it's like I'm helping you to confront your own beliefs, to confront your own thinking patterns, to confront your own behavioral patterns in relation to the spiritual bypass. So it's not just helping you to identify that you're actually experiencing spiritual bypass, but to help you now look at, on one hand, I'm doing this, yet on the other hand, I can be able to do something else. A lot of times we get individuals who, after developing that discrepancy, they do not want to deal with that issue. In counseling, we would call that resistance. They either become unwilling or unable to deal with their spiritual bypass. So we then have to now help roll with that resistance. So here, we help them to realize that as an individual, you are in control of changing your own belief systems. You are in control of changing your own behavior. You are in control of your own decision making. And then based on this, we now help you to develop your own efficacy, in the sense that sometimes you'll find some people will say, I cannot be able to change this. I'm not able to change this. And we now remove that language and change it with a new language. You are saying, I'm able to change the things that I can change, but at the same time, I'm able to cope with the things that I cannot deal with. Many times you'll find also amongst the counselors, if the counselor or the psychologist has not been competently trained in bypass, then it becomes difficult for them to help you move to the next stage. A lot of times you find as a therapist, you have to reflect on your own spirituality. You have to reflect on your own religious practices and being able to make that distinction between your spirituality and the religious behavior. And at the same time, also, you have to reflect on your own value systems, because those values a lot of times also get to have an impact on the person you are interacting with. The other question that we also ask ourselves is, now that we know individuals there's that possibility of getting into spiritual bypass, what are some of the things that you can do to prevent getting into spiritual bypass? First, we have such sessions. So a session like today actually is a form of preventing spiritual bypass, because we are actually doing psychoeducation. We are educating different individuals just for them to be able to understand that, yes, spiritual bypass actually exists. If individuals are going to be prone to spiritual bypass, one of the ways is to provide them with psychological support. The other way is to provide them with psychoeducation. The other thing is also to get what I would call psycho-spiritual education. And here now you go to your pastoral person, your pastor, your spiritual director, your spiritual care professional, for you to get this psycho-spiritual education to understand that it can happen. Then another way of preventing is actually looking up towards spiritual leadership. I know for some of us, those of us who belong to evangelical churches, sometimes we call our spiritual leaders mommy and daddy, but we are looking at someone who understands the integration of psychological health and spiritual aspects of our life, someone who is well integrated, that they know that there is what belongs to Caesar and has to be dealt by Caesar, and there is what belongs to God and has to be dealt with in a godly way. Then, of course, the final prevention method is when you go to fellowship. I know a lot of us in Christianity, we talk about fellowship, but also having a spiritual community, a community that understands that when we experience pain, we need to deal with pain, no matter the cause. A community that will be able to continuously educate me about spiritual bypass, how to prevent it, how to integrate my own spirituality, and also how to advocate and also to be integrated with other community members. So yes, in regard to the question about cognitive therapy, yes, a lot of times cognitive behavior therapy has really helped in dealing with spiritual bypass. We also have motivational interviewing and motivational enhancement therapy, helping with the spiritual bypass. Acceptance commitment therapy has also helped in dealing with spiritual bypass. So those are some of the methodologies that I've used in my practice.
So is there a healthy, like the way there's a healthy dose of narcissism that helps us thrive, is there a healthy dose of spiritual bypass, or we just stop doing it? Austin, let's start with you. Yeah.
I think in a way, if you look at spiritual bypass as a form of coping mechanism, it has its place. It has its place in terms of helping the individual not get overwhelmed by the realities of life. But then that is on one hand. On the other hand, that escape needs not to be permanent. You need to face these realities of life. So if I'm running to get to my spirituality because I'm confronted by issues, it might work maybe for a few days, but those issues will not go away. So I need to start confronting those issues. So for me, I think it helps in a way, but it is not the only way of dealing with issues.
Okay. So, Sai, permission to put back your pastor hat, because I want to throw it to the chaplain and our fake pastor, because we are the 2 hour mark. We must eat. As my representative of my tribe, we must eat. So we need to stop to finish the mkutano. So what are you doing in the religious circles to help people have that nice balance, still have faith, but stop spiritually bypassing? Steve, we'll start with you, and then Saya.
There's also a question there, if the spiritual leader is causing bypassing.
A chaplain.
Maybe Steve, yes.
Oh, and also Janet Oyende on Facebook asked, is this youth the manifestation? I think it's at the same level as Nyota and vibration. It's spiritual bypassing. Yes, and someone else asked if sitting still and being silent. I know we do it in people who are grieving. This thing of telling people it's God's will is not good, but sometimes just sitting still and just being there, knowing that the person, just knowing you're there, is actually very helpful. It's not bypassing, it's being helpful. Haya, Steve, kazi kwako.
Okay, I don't know if I should take the question that what if my spiritual leader is causing stroke, encouraging the spiritual bypass? I think what people need to understand is that you are on your own spiritual journey, and on this spiritual journey, you can find many different people that you can interact with, and some can offer leadership at some point, but it's not necessary that one person should be a spiritual leader in your life, forever. You might actually outgrow them in your own spiritual journey in certain ways. So it's important to own your own spiritual journey, your own growth, and accept the fact that along the way of your spiritual journey, if you're looking at it from a Christian perspective, God will send you different people. God is actually your leader, okay, your spiritual leader. The Holy Spirit Himself is your spiritual leader, and you should learn from Him. This is speaking from a Christian perspective. You ought to learn from the Holy Spirit, and so there's a priesthood of believers that the Bible talks about. We are all priests, before God. So do not demean yourself to the point where there's always has to be somebody who is leading you. No, you can grow to the point where it is God Himself that is leading you, and of course, along the way, you have other people from whom you can learn. Now, we should be careful not to try to bypass the fact that God has some spiritual leaders and teachers who can guide us along the way, but I think the case of Daniel is a very classic case that we need to look at real quick. Daniel is an interesting figure because by the time you see Angel Gabriel appearing to Daniel, Daniel had to have done his homework. These dreams are not coming to him or visions just because he was out there, fasting and praying for days on end. No, as a matter of fact, Daniel's dreams and visions would come decades apart from each other, and he was busy, interacting with national affairs of Babylon and other nations that Babylon was dealing with. And in those contexts, sometimes when he had exhausted every avenue of learning or acquiring knowledge, and he had a problem that there was absolutely no human being around him who could solve, then God could actually send an angel. And we see this very clearly in the context of him trying to process, why are they still in Babylonian captivity? He had to reckon with the writings of Jeremiah, who was a prophet before him. But he got to the point where, yes, Jeremiah was a spiritual leader to Daniel, but the time of Jeremiah had served its purpose, and Daniel needed, some more spiritual insight, which could not come from Jeremiah. And in this case, where he did the appropriate thing, which is to seek the Lord earnestly in prayer, because there was no other avenue. And that's where we see God actually sending Gabriel to explain. So sometimes when we hear this issues of, hey, I just went and fasted and prayed and God revealed this to me, we have to be very suspicious about those sometimes, because some of the things that you're talking about being revealed to is actually issues that you could have learned even from other avenues. So let's put in the work. So own your own journey and allow God to lead you, and know that it can get to a point where God himself, will be teaching you and leading you. And don't feel sad to actually let go of some leaders at some point. Daniel had to reckon with the fact that Jeremiah's prophecies, powerful as they were, had reached their end. And now he needed bigger revelation, and it came from God. And you can be that person that God can give that greater revelation, The other question was, what am I doing to, if I got it right, to minimize spiritual bypassing in my own context? Was that the question?
No, as in, what are you teaching? Because you're people's shepherd. What are you teaching? Teaching your wafuasi. Those are programming on KBC called Mfuasi Naomi. It's just come back. What are you teaching your wafuasi? How to balance to strike a balance between being religious and just not spiritually bypass stuff?
It's a nice question. So there's different ways that the scripture tells us this balance is needed. I think I've given one example of Daniel where, he had to do the work of studying the prophecies, studying the scriptures, and serving his time in Babylon. Nothing could have changed. No amount of prayer would have changed them, being in Babylon, except they served their time, So knowing, so what Daniel prayed for, he prayed the right prayer at the right time. Because remember, at some point, some people are trying to pray to get out of Babylon. And the word of God was, no, you have to work in Babylon, you have to serve, as a matter of fact, marry and whatnot. So he did his work over there. So we need to engage in, for me, I teach that we need to be leaders, not just within the spiritual setting, but also within other avenues of life, as much as we are believers. That's one of the things that I teach.
Did Steve freeze, or it's only me?
He froze.
Okay. Sire, you just take it up. If he comes back, he comes back.
Okay.
I'm frozen? Okay.
Oh, okay. He's unfrozen. Okay, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, it's telling me my internet is unstable for some reason, far away from the router. Where was I? Where did I freeze at?
You were still giving the example of Daniel and people in captivity.
Yeah, so if you look at the example of Daniel, there was an appointed time for him to serve, him and his colleagues, and you might have to serve a heathen nation. It was so called a heathen nation. It was actually an oppressor, but God had a purpose for him to serve there. So he had to excel. For me. I teach the people that I minister to the importance of excelling in whatever profession you have, because you can be very influential in that regard. You can see, for instance, Daniel found himself in the context where governments could actually change. But since he had developed himself so well, not just in matters of understanding spirituality, but also in matters of governance, matters of leadership, though governments would change, and in those days, the change would be very brutal, Daniel would be retained. Why? You have to ask yourself that question. Why would he be retained? Do you think like a foreign nation would just come and overrun a country and then decided, at random that let's keep Daniel? No. Probably they had interacted with Daniel, in terms of, foreign interactions as nations before. And they had noticed how excellent he was, in what he was doing, so that even at the point where they have to come and overcome this nation, they can kill everyone, but they are careful not to touch Daniel because they need him. And so they would keep him. And he continued to survive, and he continues to influence nations for good. So that's one way. The other thing is to look at scriptures in a balanced way. James, for instance, I think Saya described this very well. He says, anyone who listens to the word but does not do it is like someone who looks at his face in a mirror and after looking at himself goes away and immediately forgets what he looks like. The Bible, even the law, tells us, what we are. So if you come to the law and it tells you who you are, then what are you supposed to do? it tells you're supposed to go and do something and change. And that's the whole work of sanctification. There's work that needs to be done. And as you've noticed, even from this.
Okay, Steve, you're mute now. You're still mute, yeah.
Am I mute?
Okay,
I think
you're back now.
okay. So I was just saying this work can involve professional psychiatrists and psychologists, and we need to embrace the fact that those are also God's people who God can use to bring healing and to help us in our spiritual journey. There's the importance of doing God's will. Matthew 7:21-23 says, "Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the ones who do the will of my Father who is in heaven." So there's the aspect of doing the stuff that God has asked us to do. If I look at many scriptures, maybe like even Matthew 5:4, "Blessed are those who mourn." Mourning, emphasizing the importance of acknowledging and processing grief rather than just bypassing it, So for me, that's why I even work with the dying and their families, because that's a critical area. And I get to meet so many other people that I wouldn't meet even within the church setting. And I think we can do this even in our own different professions. Lastly, let me give the example of John the Baptist, whom Christ said was one of the greatest people that had walked on the face of the earth. And just to follow up on the discussion on the prosperity gospel, what the prosperity gospel has done, it demeans certain values and virtues that not just the Bible advocates for, but just even sensible, logical humanity advocates for, and so it only relates material prosperity to that which is meaningful. But there might be more things that are meaningful in this life than just material gain. There's people who've impacted this world in bigger ways than just making money for themselves. Mandela is one example, in the quest and fight for freedom. He didn't make a lot of money for himself, but he impacted the world. Martin Luther King Jr. is another example. And so the story of John the Baptist teaches us how we ought to relate if we are to be reckoned to be the greatest in the kingdom of God. In the book of Luke, chapter 3, from verse 10, he interacts with various classes of people. So in verse 10, it says, "And the people asked him, saying, What shall we do then?" He was preaching, but it wasn't just an issue of preaching. And remember, he is telling people the Messiah is coming. So he could have very well said, "Look, guys, there's no need to do anything. Jesus is coming. He will fix everything." But look at what he does to the people when they ask what they should do. He answered and said to them, "He that has 2 coats, let him impart to him that has none. And he that has food, let him do likewise." The fact that the Messiah was coming did not stop John from asking people to do that which they needed to do, on their part. Then came the publicans. Those are the tax collectors who were appointed by the Roman government to collect taxes, from those who had been oppressed, very hated people. They came and asked to be baptized and said to him, "Master, what shall we do?" And he said unto them, "Exact no more than that which is appointed you." Now, there were national problems going on, and he was not shy at confronting them. So for me, I try to teach my people that this work might involve a bit of conflict here and there, and it might involve a bit of risk here and there. And it might involve quite some loss here and there, like it was in the case of John the Baptist. This was risky, trying to talk to the publicans like this. And then look at the other one. And the soldiers, these soldiers are now Romans, likewise demanded of him, saying, "What shall we do?" And he said unto them, "Do violence to no man, neither accuse any falsely, and be content with your wages." Now he is addressing very dangerous classes of people. And he did not skirt around that fact by saying that, look, let's neglect all this. The Messiah is coming, and when he's coming, he will deal with it. As a matter of fact, even after the Messiah had come and he was already beginning to deal with it, he still went ahead to confront these issues, and he died because of it. You see, he died because of it, but that did not take away the testimony that Jesus gave about him. He testified that he was one of the greatest. So we might have to encounter certain hard times, tough times, especially as Christians, but spiritual bypassing cannot be the way.
Thank you. Thank you. Saya.
So I will read at length. I will read at some length, not too long. Something I think that captures this. I think what needs to be done. But before I get to that, I will say what's needed is, number one, the ability to teach people that true Christianity does not make us too heavenly minded until we are of no earthly good. And on the other counterbalance side, it does not make us too earthly minded that we are of no heavenly relevance. So the true Christianity at the end of the day is that tango. It's a tango between, it's a tango which at the core is the principles of God's kingdom, which is centrally one principle. It's called love. And that when that is embraced, it makes us earthly relevant. That's what Steve is pointing to. It makes us share our quotes, confront our realities, address the inequalities. It gives us the tools to do these things. And an escape to the with a pie in a sky by and by is exactly that. It's an escape. It's not being a proper steward. So that's thing number one that I'm doing. And if you listen to me speaking, teaching, I'm always trying to tell people, like, whether you're learning prophecy or the Psalms or the patriarchs or the prophets, or whichever other P you will get, the passion of Christ. What God is really teaching you at the center is principles to make you heavenly minded and earthly relevant at the same time. That's one. The number two is Christians and people of faith, to avoid spiritual bypassing, need to begin preaching, teaching, discipling creatively, and doing it also with relevance and with application. The whole realm of spiritual thought and teaching needs to move from just being merely a cerebral exercise that fills us with information and data. And by no means am I suggesting that that needs to be removed. It needs to be there, but I think a three-part criteria needs to always be thought about. How are we going to help individuals get clarity of what the Bible is really saying, and equipping them with the tools to know that for themselves, so that if your religious teacher is going on a tangent, you don't have to follow them. You can still stay with the word. I began by talking about Paul, and Paul speaks about a people from the region of Berea who fact-checked him. You know, like every time I read that bit, I'm like, yo, these guys had some guts, you know, like the rest of us are here thinking like, whoa, Paul said, but then there are people who are thinking like, Paul said, okay, let's see what the Bible says. And those are what Bereans did. And Paul commends them. He doesn't hide behind terms like touch not the anointed, the Lord revealed it to me. No, he's like, well, the Bereans are actually excellent. And so the first realm of teaching people needs to be with clarity, and the sort of clarity that gives people confidence in what they believe in, certainty in what they are taught, so that they're able to engage with it properly. You do realize it's often individuals who don't properly understand what they believe in, that if your faith is based on something that is crammed rather than something that is confident, then you are likely to spiritually bypass, because you don't want that faith to go left or right. It's been crammed one way. Just think about school. When you're going to an exam that you've understood, you're confident whichever way the question comes, you'll engage with it. But if you've crammed the formula and the answers, if it deviates a certain way, you're in the depth. So number one is clarity. Number two is relevance. All efforts, whether it's discipling, our VBS programs, our whichever programs of teaching, one of the things that we need to do is to teach with relevance. relevance is the key test in relevance is, how does what I'm learning in the Bible or in the guitar or in whichever sacred book today, how is it helping me live in the world today? And secondly, how is it helping me answer the anxieties that people are living with today? The original church, the church in Acts, did a brilliant job at being able to take the claims of Christianity and apply them to their realities of that time. And it was extremely compelling, what they were able to produce. And so sitting in a church and just saying, God is sending money into your M-Pesa, and you say, I receive, it does not answer the anxieties people are living within. People are living with anxieties of, how do I engage with my nephew who has gender dysphoria? How do I apply my Christian values in a space that is hostile to Christian truth now? How does this Christianity help me engage with my grandmother who is at the end of life? What does that hope look like? How does this help me think and chart through my career and my dating and my marriage? And being able to make that practical for this side of heaven, and then somehow link it to the ultimate experience in heaven, that's where the bridge to relevance is done. Or as the people who teach theology say, it's not enough to be able to explain what the word says in the town it was said in. It is important that after you're clear of what it said in the town it was said in, you need to build the bridge and say, what is it saying to the town I live in today? That's relevance. And then the third element that every teaching, I think, needs to have now is application. And that is what moves us from the what to the so what, and now to the third critical bit, which is the now what. How do I do this? Okay. Paul, after spending pages on end arguing about righteousness in Christ, that we're forgiven in Christ, that we're equal in Christ, he then spends quite an amount of time and saying, this is what the application of that looks like. It means slaves behave this way, children behave this way, husbands behave this way, wives behave this way, rulers behave this way. And where he's drawing that final application, and he doesn't just throw it in the air and say, like, go figure it out. No, he's able to distill it and show to the present day reality what it does. So I think to help people not spiritually bypass, I think the teaching, presenting of spiritual truths and its principles need to be punctuated with those three things: clarity, relevance, and application. And when individuals are able to be assisted and equipped with this, they will be able to find a lot of confidence in the toolkit that the Bible is, and then they'll be able to find a lot of more useful ways to live out their faith in every sphere of life. Then the third thing that needs to happen, so the clarity, relevance, and application was the second bucket. The third and the final thing is Christians need to get at a better job of decoupling something we created that really isn't there, the secular and the spiritual. That barrier we have created is true in some areas. You know, there's what is acceptable within Christianity. You can be dropping F-bombs and, you know, explicit. That's not the Christian way. It's not wholesome speech. But the whole posture that people take and say, your spirituality is what you do on your day of worship, and that's all, is really responsible for why people end up being spiritually bypassed, because they then see their work as being separate from their faith, and see their family and their engagement in society and in politics and in business as being something completely different from their faith. And the efforts therefore are put to insulate the faith from contamination with work or with the world or with family or any of those things. And those spheres where the spirituality is meant to be manifested, instead of them being seen as platforms, they are seen and viewed as threats. And a lot of effort is therefore put by believers to see how they can insulate themselves. And the end result is they over-leverage their spiritual side to bypass the hard work. And it is, as Steve has put it, it's a lot of hard work to think how your faith manifests in the self, in the real world. And now, as I promised, here's my quote. It is from Ellen G. White. I'll share the quote once I get that page. Okay, here it is. This passage quoted is Mark chapter 13 and verse 32. These are the words of Jesus when he says, "Take heed, watch and pray, for you know not what the time is." And then this is what Ellen White writes, and I think it's apt for today's discussion. "Take you heed, watch and pray," were the words of our Savior spoken in reference to the time of the end and his second coming. And when he'll come to take his faithful children home, first you are to watch. Watch lest you should speak hastily, fretfully, and impatiently. Watch lest pride should find a place in your heart. Watch lest evil passion should overcome you instead of you subduing them. Watch lest a careless, indifferent spirit comes upon you and you neglect your duty and become a light and trifling, and your influence becomes a source of death rather than life. That's a watch. Then second, you are to pray. Jesus would not have enjoined this upon you unless there was actual necessity for it. It is well known to him that of yourself you cannot overcome the many temptations of the enemy and the many snares laid for your feet. He has not left you alone to do this, but has provided a way that you can obtain help. Therefore, he said to you, pray. To pray correctly is to ask God in faith for the very things you need. Go to your chamber in some retired place and ask your Father, for Jesus' sake, to help you. There is power in that prayer that is sent up from a heart convinced of its own weaknesses, yet earnestly longing for the strength that comes from God. But before you can expect this help, you must do what you can on your part. Watch and pray. Let your prayers be fervent. Let it be to the language of your heart. So I think I like what Ellen White has to say about the watch component and the pray component and the human duty component. I think for me, it summarizes what needs to be done and the posture we need to take towards this. It's from the SCAPs I've read from the book called The Youth Instructor, October 1, 1855. To you, Paul.
Okay, we must eat. If you have a question you want to verbalize that we did not touch, this is the time you raise your hands. Otherwise, we need to close the mkutano. I think we've covered everything. Any question? Going once, going twice? Asa tufunge kituo, and I think you know next week's topic, right? The one that for next week's topic, kuleni mapema, or just come with your dinner. We have 5 panelists, so it's that long. Yeah, there was no other way to cut it down, but yeah. Asa tufunge mkutano.
So thank you, Steve, and thank you, Obuluta. It's actually interesting. The panel today was from the west side of Kenya. They are known to be very spiritual individuals. And yeah, Obuluta confirmed it with a picture of Jesus and a cockerel on the side. Thank you, Steve, for sharing your insights. We appreciate for being there. And thank you all of us for sitting through. It's long, it's difficult times to have to bring some of these conversations, but thank you for making your time and thank you for engaging us in the online space prior to this. I want to hope and pray that our faith, at least in God, for those who are Christians, is strengthened as a result of this and not weakened. Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Paul, for being the host and putting this thing together and for throwing Mashakura questions at all of us. We appreciate that. Now, next week, we're talking about surrogacy. How we think of some topics only God will answer. So we're talking about surrogacy. Not everyone is surrogacy and adoption. Not everyone is able to have children for one reason or the other. In the past, we've talked about endometriosis, fertility, and stuff. Please make sure you check those. So next week, we're looking at surrogacy and adoption. We have a big panel because we have to look at the legal side, the medical side of it, the lived experience side of it. So yeah, there is going to be a surrogate mother on the show. There are going to be lawyers will be there. So if you're considering adoption or you're considering surrogacy down the road, on a light note, Kenyans, you lined up to give your eyes. Yeah, so maybe wombs, you can be able to consider kuja next week. Maybe you might learn there's a ni biashara umekuwa ukilalia mahali. But on a more serious note, please, any person who's considering this or supporting somebody through this, or who for one reason or the other cannot have a kid or wants to adopt maybe for whatever reason, that would be a nice conversation for you to come through. Today's recording will be available in all the respective platforms. On YouTube, we have a special channel for this conversation. It's called Authentic Dialogue. And also it will be available. The live stream has gone up on the Authentic Dialogues with Sarah Jackson Facebook page, so you can be able to catch it up there. Please, while you're there, remember to like, share, and subscribe. And you can also share ideas, questions, topics, panelists you would like to appear on this beat. We do this for you, and so your voice matters. You can keep in touch with us also on Instagram at @Sarah Jackson, and the same handle for our TikTok page. As always, happy to be there and happy to talk with each other. After this, we normally go offline for individuals who may want to ask a question that they do not want to remain in the World Wide Web. We have a behind the scenes. I think today it will be brief because people need to eat. But if you have that kind of question, please feel free to remain behind and we can discuss it. Till next time, do not spiritually bypass. Let's build the muscle. God bless you all.